Glad to have everybody here. The purpose of the meeting today is to take up one bill. And then beyond that, I've got Jake Proctor from the Military Stabilization Committee and Foundation. And he will give a briefing on the package of bills that we're going to pass during this legislative session. With that, Mr. Clerk.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, Mr. Castle, Mr. Jones, Mr. Wood, Mr. Treadway, Mr. Pettis, Mr. Castle, Miss McClaney, Mr. Knight Gittin,
Here.
Mr. Harrison, Mr. Robertson,
Here.
Mr. Starnes.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
All right. We have folks, we'll do business. Clerk.
House Bill 103.
All right.
Well, yes, House Bill 103, this is pretty much the same bill that passed through this committee and passed the House floor 2 years ago. Chairman Reynolds carried this bill, but since we didn't get a chance to get it through the Senate, we're out of time. And so we were going to introduce it last session, but decided we'd do it this session here. So we really call it a cleanup bill. As you look through the bill, you'll see several items lined out and crawling, just trying to clean it up. We have Space Force updated the definition of veterans and so forth. And then also this bill is vetted through the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs Board. And we'll also have a representative from the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. So if anyone have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But once again, it's the same bill that we passed 2 years ago.
What page is the definition of veteran?
Just gonna be on page
3.
line 57. What did we add to Space Force? Any other questions? Jerry, you good there?
If there are no more questions or against, if you're for this bill, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I call for a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I move for a favorable report, Mr. Chairman.
Y'all are good folks. You got in trouble today. All right, all for the bill, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Bill passes.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. And Mr. Clerk, at this point, can we go into our business?
Yes, sir. You correct the nameplates as well as the voters.
All right. And ladies and gentlemen, at this point, what we're going to do, everybody is welcome to stay. We have a presentation from Jake Proctor that will pretty much outline the majority of the business that we're going to conduct this session. So,
All right. If we haven't met, my name is Jake Proctor. I'm the Executive Director of the Alabama Military Stability Foundation. What that is, if you're not familiar, is in 2011, the state established the Military Stability Commission, which is led by the Lieutenant Governor under the Jobs Creation Military Stability Commission Act. So we are led by Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth, and then there is a commission set up with civic leaders and senior former military officials for each military community throughout the state. as well as the tag, legislative leadership, and I can get you a list of everybody that's involved in the commission if you'd like. As part of that law, our foundation, the Military Stability Foundation, a nonprofit organization, was established as the action arm of that. So as the commission does its work, which is primarily focused on securing, protecting, and expanding Alabama military installations throughout the state, originally due to the threat of base realignment and closure, and now more of an offensive posture to try to make sure we're recruiting all the missions we can to the state. The foundation is kind of the action arm of that. So I'm the executive director of that. He worked with Robert LaBranch. He was previously the executive director of this foundation. We have a regional board of directors. So we have 6 board members from Huntsville, Anniston, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Fort Novosil, the Wiregrass region. And we have a military family liaison who runs the Heroes Welcome Initiative. If you're familiar with that, it's basically a one-stop shop for any military or veteran in the state looking at what benefits apply to them through transition or as they serve in the state or as they move in or out of the state. So it's all, that's kind of a quality of life initiative that we do, but the original intent and still the intent is to make sure that we're making our installations as competitive as possible for future missions and then protecting the ones that are there today. So that's kind of just a little bit of background on who we are. And the functions of us are advocacy, so we work with the Lieutenant Governor to work on the military bills package, which we're here to discuss today. We help communicate federal priorities for the Alabama installations and defense communities through the congressional delegation and kind of serve as a resource for them as they look at best ways to do that federally, which is where obviously the predominance of funding and those decisions come from. And so we kind of serve as a resource in that capacity. We have a small grants program kind of focused on that mission. So examples of that are with Space Command competition in Huntsville, F-35 basing here in Montgomery. The foundation provided grants to help do design studies, SWOT analysis, and other things like that in order to make them more competitive and then advise them through the process of basing decisions. We also do economic impact analysis for the state, so it's usually every 2 or 3 years we'll do a statewide economic impact of the defense industry, the military missions, aerospace industry as well, so NASA, especially up in Huntsville, on how that impacts the state, how's that growing, where is it shrinking, so we can inform the legislature, the lieutenant governor's office, and the congressional delegation on where attention is required. And like I said, we have the military family liaison and Heroes Welcome Initiative, and that's really focused on providing better quality of life throughout the state for existing, transitioning, and the veteran population. So the way we do this is, it's a combination of issues that percolate down from the Pentagon, issues that have risen throughout the state. Throughout the year, we kind of go out and visit all the military installations and see what issues are affecting them most. And then also individual bills from members that would like to have their bill as part of the legislative package. So right now we're sitting at about 13 bills, and we kind of drafted a majority of them. The professional license portability bills are still being drafted, but we're expecting them soon. And I'll go into each of these, so but this is kind of the 30,000-foot view. All right, so the professional license portability, what this does is when a military member moves into the state of Alabama, whether themselves, if they have a job outside of the military, or particularly for the spouses, there's a nationwide network of compacts that are set up for different licensed professions. And if you join that compact when you move in the state, there's a process to work through the licensure board in order to get reciprocity for your professional license in the state. The state has passed 9 of these over the last 5 or so years. The Department of Defense sets a list of priority professions that we work from. Important is, and I'll kind of call these out as we go through, certain pieces of these legislation actually affect how our military bases are scored when military mission competitions come up, and these fall into that category. So the Department of Defense, on their website, you can go see what every state has done on these issues. They don't score you, quote unquote, but they do say if you've done it or not. But then this military services, so the Army, Air Force, the Air Force particularly, takes that data, and when they're doing a study, basing study for Maxwell or for Redstone or for one of the other installations, that's part of the scoring apparatus under a quality of life category. A particularly large note for this year on professional license portability is that last year Congress passed reciprocity for all military spouses across the board. But they retained the compact as the primary choice for how those are processed. So they still are leaning on the professional license compacts throughout the state as a first resort way for military spouses and military members to transfer their licenses. These are, in no priority order, but these are the 5 that we've identified for this year to work through. And each compact is kind of nationwide, so you add in your kind of state specific information, but it's largely, has to retain the language from the compact. Any questions on portability? This one we're particularly excited about. So this is deployment pay tax exemption, and that's state tax exemption. So currently under Alabama law, if you are an active duty member of the military and you deploy to a combat zone designated by the president, your state income tax is exempt for your pay during that deployment. That leaves out a lot of overseas deployments that are not in combat zones. That also leaves out the National Guard in a lot of cases from those pay. So what this bill does is it exempts active duty, reserve, and National Guard components from state income tax during overseas deployment. So if you're leaving the United States to go on a deployment, your pay would not be subject to state income tax. Additionally, especially for the National Guard, stateside mobilization. So if they're going to the border, they're doing a disaster response, we have another big freeze, that pay would also be exempt from state income tax. We drafted this legislation with LSA. We're waiting on the fiscal note, and we got some assistance from DC in getting all the data we needed to see what the actual fiscal impact would be. But we're not expecting it to have a very large impact. But we'll reserve judgment until we see the note. Yes, sir.
On that, on like, say the Navy, if they do like a med cruise, does that count as the?
Yeah, if they're
even
leaving,
if you're not in
yeah, as long as you're leaving the borders of the United States waters, it will apply. For us, that's not as, for Alabama particularly, we don't have any naval units stationed here, but what we're trying to show is this is a model for other states as well. California, Florida, all those that have very large naval.
but I was in Jacksonville, Florida, so I still pay taxes in Alabama, but I lived on the boat pretty much, but I was just making sure,
Yeah, they would apply for that.
Okay.
Yeah. Another note on this one is that federally, they're looking at doing this for federal income tax as well. We've been talking to members of the Alabama congressional delegation about that. It's a big priority for them. So you'll kind of see this from a 2-angle approach from Alabama side, hopefully other states, as well as the federal side. This will be a huge recruiting tool for the National Guard and for the active duty and reserve components. And obviously it's a huge quality of life impact. The last thing you want to be worrying about on deployment is how much taxes you're paying. Any other questions on this exemption? Special education enrollment. So Alabama already has kind of advanced enrollment, remote enrollment for military members moving into the state. So this clarifies that also applies not only to just enrollment in the school, but also to special education services in particular. So if you have an individual education plan for your child, you're moving into the state, this ensures comparable services. I've talked to, my sister's a special education teacher. She actually just took a new job, but she's a special education teacher, was at Mountain Brook High School in Birmingham. Talked to a lot of other special education teachers. This happens already, but again, we want to make sure it's clear in the law, and it also has to be in the statute for DOE to score the basis favorably on the issue. It also requires parental consent to change the services. So if parents move in with a child with special needs, before the school makes a major adjustment to their education plan in the new district, they would have to talk to the parents.
I think, is that, that Chad?
We looked at it.
Is with Pete? Is that the one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
How do we currently rank the military?
Depends on the issue. I mean, we're in some rankings number 1 or number 2 in the state for quality of life. It really comes down when they're scoring. They don't necessarily look at Alabama, and by they I mean the Pentagon. They are looking at a particular installation. So if they have to base the F-35 aircraft, for example, they'll do it as a study for all the installations that are competing for that base, and they'll kind of rank that installation. And it can vary based on their scoring categories. The Air Force's scoring categories are interesting, and we provided them a lot of feedback. All the other states as well have as well. So through the American Defense Communities Organization, I sit on the State Advisors Council. So there's 1 or 2 folks from every state that sit on that council, and through that we can kind of share feedback and how we're working through issues in our state. The scorecard process for the Air Force particularly is an issue that they've been receiving a lot of feedback on. So we want to make sure that we are both making sure we are as competitive as possible throughout the process, but then also making the process as fair as possible and actually representative of the bases that they're looking at. Any other questions on this one? Okay, concurrent juvenile jurisdiction. So concurrent jurisdiction is basically the ability to pass jurisdiction between the federal and state government, federal government and state government. Alabama has had concurrent jurisdiction in the state since the 1940s. An issue arises when a minor commits a crime on a military installation. Currently, they are only charged in the federal court system. And the federal court system generally lacks extensive juvenile programming. So in many cases, the juvenile is not being charged at all, or they're being charged as an adult through the federal court system. The states have a much more robust programming for juveniles. So what this bill does is says the state will accept, if the federal government waives its jurisdiction for crimes committed by minors on military installations, if it is also a state crime. There's a few benefits to this one. So one is for non-violent, non-major crimes that are occurring, and they do occur, committed by minors on installations, there's a lot more options to go to the penal system in the state for them to, there's different programming and different ways for them to be handled through the system. Secondly is data tracking, and this is not the DoD position, this is just based on my experience. When the federal government decides not to charge a case, oftentimes they're not tracking that case any further. So if a minor commits a crime on a military base, a major crime, and the Pentagon or the federal prosecutor decides not to prosecute it, that's where they stop tracking that data. So you have instances where minors are committing crimes, they're moving to new installations as their parents PCS to a new base, and they're committing the same crime. And there were, when I worked in DC, it was a big issue that there was just no way to track those cases. And there's kind of there was a lot of feedback from parents whose children were victims of these crimes, that it was unfair to them that they weren't able to see what was going on. So just by the state government being involved, the states do a lot better job at sharing that data and recording that data through existing systems, so we're not creating anything new here for that. But it's also going to help from that perspective.
And that's already jacket I'm looking at.
I think it just got jacked.
Okay, all right. So, anybody want to grab that one? Carry that one. I'll go about it.
But I have to make it happen.
You want to carry that one?
It says on it.
Okay, military family anti-discrimination. So the nexus of this is based on constant moves of military families within Alabama and then within the country. There are certain categories of discrimination that they sometimes face, including housing, employment, and education. Because in many of those cases, a 2-year stint in the state is not an attractive, person to be bringing in for housing or for employment or for education. This one's a bit more complicated based on the way that Alabama's anti-discrimination law is set up. Obviously, most anti-discrimination laws at the federal level, things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Civil Rights Act, things like that, the EEOC courts, all that kind of stuff. But the Pentagon is scoring us on these. So we want to see what we can do from the state's perspective in putting this into our laws. The real only equivalent to this in state law right now is age discrimination. So we're working with LSA to find the right way to do that. It's an ongoing conversation.
I wouldn't know about that.
Okay.
Let people be.
Yeah.
You know,
This is one that we all looked at yesterday, right?
yes, you know, and then we had.
Yeah.
So we're still working on the LSA, still working on draft, and we're communicating with on that. But we'll.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
You got it yesterday?
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
Great.
I'd like to ask you questions later.
All right, veteran treatment courts. So there's about 20 or so veteran treatment courts. So these are diversion courts. So if you're a veteran and you committed a drug offense or some other offense, you can be placed in these as through a diversionary program through the circuit court or whichever county court you're working with. We would like to expand these, and this is an issue that Chairman Oliver and Rick Pascal and a few others have been talking about and working on. There was an initial bill drafted, but we're also working through some feedback from some judiciary stakeholders because we like all 67 counties to be covered. There's different veteran population densities. There's different population densities. There's different needs for these programs throughout the state. And then there's some really good best practices we're learning from existing veteran treatment courts that we'd like to incorporate as possible, while also not impacting the veteran treatment courts that exist. They're working, we don't want to disrupt their workflow. If they want to adopt best practices, there's things we can do there. And then there's also a resource issue here. So there's about $2 million in funding every year for accountability courts, so drug courts, family courts, those kind of things, and veteran treatment courts. If we created 40 more courts in the state, we could impact the existing accountability court system heavily. So we're thinking about innovative ways to resource these courts. There are possible federal resources we could be tapping into. There's non-governmental stakeholders here that are already supporting existing veteran treatment courts. So this one's still kind of like a couple of the others is still in the works, but it's certainly a priority that we'd like to address, and there's certainly a need for it. The recidivism rates out of that existing federal treatment courts are in the single digits compared to your normal recidivism rate, which sits around 50%.
Is there any way that these can be incorporated to different, the existing diversion courts that exist in counties now?
Yes, so I mean, it's usually the same, judge running at those different courts in the areas. The benefit of this particular court is if you're a veteran at all, and in some, they're doing it a little differently throughout different veteran treatment courts. In some cases, if you went to basic training for a day, you could potentially qualify to go through this court. So you can qualify for this court a lot easier if you're a veteran than for other courts. Yes, sir.
I might add in reading the legislation just passed the House on gaming, that court is specifically named in the legislation.
Okay. I'll look into that. I've been trying to stay away from gaming as much as possible.
I suggest you get close to it and move that.
Yeah. This is the one y'all just considered and passed through, so I won't go into too much detail on it, but important piece of legislation to make sure we're updating at the statute. High school athletics, so similar to some of the enrollment challenges you see in schools and in other programming, high school sports is particularly difficult for military families when they're moving out of a cycle that allows them to register for sports in a district. Many years ago, Alabama actually passed a 50-state compact for the Education Compact, which provided a lot of kind of solid, high-level guidance for the states on how they implement compacts for education services. And that led to advanced enrollment and other things for actual school enrollment and things like that. We are still seeing issues where a family moves into the state during a military move, and they're moving outside of a registration cycle for a particular sport for their child. So what this bill does is it allows the schools to enroll those out of cycle, and also has some language in there to make sure that the athletic associations are following suit as well.
Well, basically, if let's say, if a child had to register by September 1st for that school cycle, but then their family moves into the area of November 1st,
Right.
they would still be allowed to register.
Yes, sir.
You're not registered in school, or just?
No,
This
this
is-
is sports.
This is just
Okay,
sports.
yeah.
Right.
There's already laws in place that
That's
allow
right,
you to
right,
remote enroll or advance enroll in the school.
And now, cause there was a time I remember in, playing sports in high school here that a military family would come and he had to wait.
Yeah.
So that's not allowed anymore, right? That. That's
For school sports, technically, they're supposed to do everything they can to make sure that that student can enroll in sports, but it's not specific enough to actually enforce. So, like, if you move in after we do get communication from military families, where, for example, volleyball, this one family moved in, the school is not allowing them to register for their daughter into the volleyball team because they moved in after the enrollment date for the sport.
Also, we just passed legislation, I think last year before last, to help with that is, as soon as you get your orders, you can enroll online.
Yeah. And a lot of times, there are a ton of benefits and things like that exist. The family doesn't always know they exist. And we're doing everything we can to make sure that families, as they transition in, know everything there is to know about what they can and what benefits apply to them. This helps us catch those that don't necessarily understand that system and doesn't punish the child for something that they didn't know about.
You got this already?
This is jacketed. I don't know if we have a sponsor yet, but
Oh, okay.
okay. So this one is in the package. It's being led by the Guard, and I have not seen the draft yet. This is a much more technical piece of legislation, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because I haven't read the draft. But it's some reforms that are being sought for the ANGAP program, which is the program that allows you to, if you join the National Guard, to get a scholarship to go to school. It changes the name of the program to Smart Guard Alabama, simplifies the application process, and it expands benefits to some non-education related, so trainings and professional training and stuff like that. Again, I haven't seen this piece of legislation yet, so I'm not going to be able to comment too much on it. But this is planned if they're able to get an agreement that it would be part of our package.
This one.
And I work, Stephen from the Guard and I work very closely together. So, all right, that's it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, I can give you my card. If you need information, and as sponsorships are taken up, I'll be here throughout the process to help and help with the talking points or just education on the bill. So just let me know what you need.
All right, well, thanks. Thanks so much.